Hi guys and welcome to my channel. My name is Troy and this is my world. Earlier this week on Instagram, I posted this illustration I did of a garden. This is concept art for my upcoming webcomic Cinderelle, and I got a request to make a tutorial on how I drew it. And since I love drawing nature scenes and I have a lot of shortcuts and tips on how I do it, I thought it would be a great idea to make a video and break down how I build depth and atmosphere in a sunny garden scene. I'll also teach you how I make custom brushes using Clip Studio Paint. So break out your notebook or draw along as I'm gonna go fast. Timestamps are in the description. Let's get started. So the first thing I do is sketch out my entire scene. I make a very simple sketch. Even the characters are not very detailed. And as you can see, I have two reference images set up. I really loved the field and the tree in the first image, and then in the second image, I just had to steal that beautiful archway with the pink flowers. This scene is going to be broken down into 3 different dimensions. We've got a very simple background of trees and sky, and then our midground, we've got, of course, our grassy field, and our tree with 2 characters. One of them is swinging and the other is pushing her. These characters are from my webcomic Cinderelle, and I just love them so much. Celeste is on the swing and Giselle is pushing her, and they're just having the gayest little time of their life. And then in the foreground, we have an archway of flowers with a couple of bushy hydrangea bushes, and then I have the stone pathway leading into the scene. I wanted this scene to have Celeste on the swing as the focal point, so she's in the center, or slightly off center, but mostly the center, and then all of the other elements in the scene are kind of pointing towards her, like the path, for example. Giselle's attention is on her, and yeah, Celeste is just, she's front and center of this image. Once we have our finished sketch, we jump right into the sky. I do a simple blue gradient for the sky with the bottom being white, and to me this kind of represents like an atmospheric, it shows the atmosphere when the bottom is white, I don't know. But also, this doesn't really matter because by the end of the image you can barely see the sky, but I'm just explaining how I do it anyway in case it's helpful for anyone. The next thing I do is I block out some really simple fluffy clouds. So I just use the airbrush to make like a white cloud shape. And then as you see, I use a gray to block in like the shadows of the clouds. And I do kind of an intense gray, and that makes the clouds look very full and dense. At this point in the drawing, I've already decided where I want the light to be coming from. So in this case, the sun is kind of in the upper right corner. So the shadows on the clouds will reflect that. I adjust the color of the shadows a little bit so that they're more saturated and less dark. We're already jumping into the background image, which is the dark tree line. These trees are extremely simple. They're just kind of cloud-like shapes. I use a pretty neutral green color. If you look at my color wheel, you'll notice that there are yellow greens and then there's blue greens. And the color I usually use for trees is a very in-the-middle neutral green, whereas the color that I'll use for grass is a brighter, more yellow green. And this is just something I see reflected in real life, like in the first reference image. I drop a gradient on the grass, with the grass further away being a lighter color and the grass closer to us being a darker color. And this is just because things tend to get lighter because of atmospheric particles the further away from the eye they are. And also, I knew that my foreground was going to have a lot of shadow in it, so I'm just kind of preemptively laying that out. I lock the layer that the trees are on, and then using the quick lasso fill tool, which I'm pretty sure I had to download by the Clip Studio Gallery, by the way. It's not something that just comes with the program. You have to like look for it and download it. But anyway, using that tool, I map out the shadows on the trees. I'm still drawing in a very cloud-like shape and indicating where some heavier branches might be. It's extremely simple, extremely rudimentary. You just don't have to use a lot of detail to get your point across here. It's more about shape and color. I add some extra colors in the trees just to indicate that there's different types of trees. And here I am going in again with the shadow, and I'm making it even darker. And you can see that the color I used for the shadow is a very bluish green. It's basically teal. For some reason, the next segment of my audio got fucked up and now I have to redo it. So I'm really sad. Guys, it's so hard making videos. I love how this one turned out though, so please keep watching. If you are still watching at this point and you like this video and you want to see more tutorials, you should take a moment to like and subscribe. So now we're moving on to the midpoint, and the next section I actually put down a layer of white and made it semi-transparent so that I could see the figures better. I'm working a little on the tree, and let me tell you now, this tree kicked my ass. I had to redo it a couple of times. Not really redo it, but just fidget with it. But I tend to do my trees in 3 layers. By the way, I don't like drawing trees that much. I think they're really hard to draw. So this is kind of how I do my trees. I do a dark background of leaves, and then the trunk, I usually go for a very like neutral, almost purple gray color. And this is because I noticed that a lot of tree trunks, like you would think, oh, a tree trunk is brown, right? But they're kind of more like a very neutral color. They're not like a bright brown. They're like a very gray color. And I just observed that sometimes they almost look kind of purple because of lighting and stuff. So that's why I give my trees kind of purple trunks. And then on top of those 2 layers, I put a lighter leaf layer, and this one covers up all my ugly little branches that I did. You're gonna see me fidgeting with this tree a lot because I struggled with the colors, I struggled with the leaf types. I did end up making a new custom brush for this tree. I'm gonna speed through me struggling here because ouch. I will tell you that my technique for drawing trees is to do dark leaves in the back and then bright leaves in the front, because this creates a sense of depth and shadow within the tree. I lock the layer that the trunk is on and drop a gradient down to make it darker towards the leaves, and then I use a pencil textured brush to make really lazy squiggles to represent the bark. My style for trees is very cartoonish because if it wasn't, it would probably take me hours to draw a tree. They're so complicated. Now that I have the tree out of the way, it's time for me to move on to my figures. And not gonna lie, I struggled with the figures a lot. I redrew Giselle, who's the pusher, a bunch of times, and ended up abandoning her and going back to Celeste and drawing Celeste first, and then going back to Giselle and fixing her pose, because at this point of the video I didn't really like how this piece was turning out and I was really nervous, and I was like, oh my god, did I just waste all my time making this thing that I don't even like? And my hand was sweaty and sticking to the monitor because I was so nervous. So yeah, I was like redoing this sketch a couple of times and just struggling. So after giving up Giselle, I move on to Celeste on the swing, and I love how she turned out on the swing. I think it's so cute and fun, and there's so much motion in her pose, and I think part of the reason I'm able to convey motion really well through my images is I play a lot with the hair and the clothes and how they're affected by the motion. So you'll see in this sketch that her dress is kind of being dragged up towards the right, as well as her hair. And this gives the sensation that she's just coming down from the apex of her swing, which is pushing her hair and her dress forward. And now we're moving back to Giselle. I ended up exaggerating her pose more, so I pushed her head and torso forward to give more of the sensation of her pushing and lurching her body forward to push Celeste, and her hips are still like kind of backwards, and this just exaggerated the motion. You can really see like the effort she put into pushing Celeste, and also her hair ends up being kind of disarrayed and in her face, which also gives the sensation of great effort. And I think also her sleeve is coming off of her shoulder, off of one of her shoulders, and I think that kind of shows like she did a big movement that took a lot of effort and that upset her clothing. So that's how I convey motion and movement through my poses, is not only is it the exaggeration of the pose, the position of the limbs, but also what effect their movement has on their clothes and their hair. After I was happy with the sketches, I adjusted Giselle to be a bit smaller so you could tell she was really behind Celeste, and then I started lining. I unfortunately don't have a lot of specific tips for line art. I know a lot of people struggle with line art because I struggled with line art for years and years and years. It was my least favorite step of the process, so much so that my old art style didn't have line art at all. It would just kind of be a sketch or a painterly sketch or a clean sketch, and I don't think there's any secret to it other than finding a brush that you feel like you have control over and you like the look of. It took me a really long time because I'm very picky about my line art brushes. I just wanted to bring that up in case anybody is struggling with their line art. I think it's just a matter of practice, unfortunately. I don't have any secret tips for you. You may have noticed, but I don't zoom in a lot when I'm drawing, and that's because I want to know what the overall image feels like instead of zooming in and then getting really lost in the detail work. So I tend to work with my canvas like just at one size. Once I'm done with my line art, I lock the layer and I make it like a warm brown color, and I set the layer to linear burn, and this is how I always do my line art. It looks like I colored the line art without actually having to, and I think it looks a lot softer and more pleasant than a pure black line art. I set the line art as a reference layer, and then I use an automatic fill tool to fill in the line art. Though sometimes I have to go in and fill it by hand because there's little gaps in my line art that the fill tool won't recognize. Now that I am starting to color, this is a good time to talk about my color theory and how I pick out my colors. I'll try to explain it as best as possible, but again, this is something that has just become very intuitive to me and took a lot of years of practice and agonizing over colors and color picking because I did not used to feel as good about picking colors as I do now, and I have struggled with them a lot. So if you also struggle with colors a lot, don't feel bad, keep practicing. Sometimes I even take color palettes from other images just to learn and play and practice with. When I started Cinderelle a year and a half ago, I was actually still copying color palettes from other images. I will say I rely on complementary colors a lot. Like this overall image is going to end up being very green and purple, which I think look very good together. So we have a lot of greenery in the leaves, while the flowers and Giselle's dress end up being way more purple. Like I said before, my shadows end up being purple usually, so I find it easier to make colors like pink, purple, and blue look good in those shadows, whereas colors like orange and yellow might turn out more gray or brown if you were going to put a purple toned shadow over them. I hope that makes sense, but basically I'm trying not to muddy the colors too much. Celeste, the character on the swing, spends a lot of time in this garden, and I tried to reflect that through her green dress. She looks like she's part of the scenery that she's in, whereas Giselle wears a blue dress, which makes her stand out a bit more as someone who might not ordinarily be a part of this garden. Giselle's skin is very orange, which makes her blue dress complement her skin tone, whereas Celeste is a little bit more red, which makes her look great in green. Both of the girls have dark hair, which makes them stand out from the rest of the scene, and also it complements their very light pastel dresses. Not gonna lie, at this point, my drawing looks a little wacky. It's very flat, there's no dimension, but if you watch till the end of this video, you're gonna see how I tie the whole thing together. With my middle ground finished, we're gonna move on to my foreground, and I immediately start mapping out the arch. Again, I'm using the quick lasso tool to make very simple shapes in this like greenish white color, which are the wooden columns creating the archway. I put absolutely zero effort or detail into these because you're barely going to see them. Mapping out the shape with the color is the best way to indicate that something's there without wasting a lot of time and energy on it. As long as the silhouette of the shape is clear, we should be good to go. As you can see, my foliage is just this blobby green shape, and then I cover it very lazily with a leaf brush. I made the stones with a very light kind of grayish blue. It's a very similar color to the sky now that I think about it. And again, I just draw them with the quick fill tool, getting smaller and receding into the background. I like the color of them because it's almost the same as Giselle's dress, and their placement in the image, I don't know how to explain this, but it's kind of creating a triangle where we see the blue stones, Giselle's blue dress, and then the hint of blue sky, and something about that, I don't know, it's making a triangle shape, and I like that. It feels like all the colors tie in together. Now I'm going back to the archway, and I'm using a rose brush that I made myself to really quickly create all of the flowers at once. And I'm going to take a moment to teach you how I made this rose tool, because I feel like this is the thing that people are going to be asking about the most, is how do I make my custom brushes and how did I make my roses? Okay, I'm doing this the second time because the first time something messed up with the video. It was not capturing everything on my screen. So we're doing this a second time, but that's okay because I'm going to be even better and faster and more efficient at explaining this to you guys. So the first thing I did was make a 1" by 1" canvas, and I'm going to teach you how to make a little rose brush. So the only colors you need to draw with are black and white, and we're going to put down a white base that's going to be roughly your flower shape. Now, I am drawing a rose in a style that works for my webcomic, and I encourage you, if you're going to do this, to draw in whatever style suits you, because that's the best way to make the brushes just fit everything that you're using them for. So I'm just creating a really basic cartoony shape because that works for my comic. Now we have a really simple little white shape. You can barely see it because I made the background invisible, but oops. If we, hang on. If we fill the background black, then you can see it better, but we're gonna get rid of it before we export this image. So on a secondary layer, I'm going to make super simple indications of rose petals. Again, very cartoony, super simple, because we're never really going to see these roses in close-up detail, and if we were going to see a rose in close-up detail, I would draw like a more proper rose, but because these are just like background images, they can be kind of low quality. So I'm going to merge the lines with the white base. See, they're together now. And then this step is really important. You're going to want to go up here where it says expression color and select gray instead of color. And this is what lets you change the color of the brush later. So it's very important, don't forget that step. Now we're going to go to edit and go down to register material and image. And we're going to name this rose example 1. Because rose example was taken because I did this tutorial earlier. And click this check mark where it says use for brush tip shape, and then all we're going to do is put it somewhere. Mine is going to go in my Cinderelle folder, and that's it. So let's make a new image to test it out on. I'm doing 4x6, doesn't really matter. Okay, so now we're going to make our brand stinking new brush. I'm gonna delete the one I made earlier with the old tutorial that didn't work. Goodbye. Okay, so to make a new brush, all you have to do is find a brush you already have. This is the only way I know how to do it, by the way. We're gonna find a brush that we already have that's kind of similar to what we want. So for example, I'm gonna take this this like row of pearls. Let's see if we change the color. Yeah, it's like a row of pearls. I downloaded this off the asset gallery, and we're going to duplicate it and name the new brush, you know, Rose Brush 2 or whatever. And now that we have a duplicated brush, we can do whatever we want to it without worrying about messing it up. So we're going to go over here to the tool, subtool, see this little toolbar, click on that and this window will pop up, and we're going to go to brush tip. See how there's a bunch of images of the pearl? We're going to select all of the pre-existing images and delete them and add brush tip shape. And then when this menu pops up, we're going to look up the old brush that we made. Here's mine, rose example 1, and we're going to add it. Now you can add as many variations of the brush you want to make as you want, or I don't know, maybe there's a limited number. But for example, if you wanted to do a flower from different angles or just different variations, you could just like add more. So for this example, I'm just going to do this one. And you can see it's just kind of like a boring line of flowers. So we're going to go to spraying effect so that it'll jitter up a bit more. And let's see, I have to play with this to make it easier to see. Sometimes I even don't remember how to do this and I have to like mess with it a lot. Okay, I think I've gotten it somewhere where I like it more. It took me a long time to figure out what the problem was, but I think my brush size was just too small for it to look good. Yeah, so as you can see, even I'm not a pro at making brushes, and you have to kind of play around a little bit, but some things I want to point out is the direction of the particle I'm going to set to random, because then the image of the rose will turn itself randomly and it'll add like more variation, so you can't tell by looking at it that it's like the same picture over and over. I'm also gonna set flip horizontal to random, as well as flip vertical, so this will add for even more variation. Let's test out the brush right now. Okay, it's looking pretty good, but as you can see, all of the roses are the exact same color, which, by the way, you know that we drew the rose in white and black, right? But look, now the colors are different, and it depends on your secondary and primary colors on the wheel. So if I wanted to make them pretty pink roses, I would change the color. Let's see. Okay, I want the inside to be darker and the outside to be lighter. Let's see what they look like. Oop. You have to, if you want both colors to show, you have to select the primary color box. Okay. Okay, these are way cuter. But if we want to add some color variation, that's also very easy. We're going to go back into the tools. So we go over to color jitter and select change brush tip color. And what's so exciting about this is when you change the hue, okay, can't really see it now, but let's see. Oh, okay, I see why it wasn't working. Hang on. So change the brush tip color and then go down here to change main color and select main color and subcolor, and this way the colors will all change together. I know you can barely see it on the screen, I'm gonna have to zoom in, but see how the roses go from like this beautiful rainbow to gradually more like the color we selected. So what I like to do, oh, and also what you can do is you can hit the saturation, which makes them go all the way to white to a vibrant red, or you can play with the luminosity, which will make them turn black. Okay, so what I like to do is make the hue just like slightly different, and this way you get the color that you're going for, but so many different little variations of that color, and I just love how this looks. I think it turned out so cute. You guys like the brushes? Oh, I just want to draw roses all day. They're so fun. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little tour of the other brushes that I use for Cinderelle, and I'm not going to make tutorials. Well, I'll make more tutorials for these if you guys want, but I'm not going to make them available to download because these are my brushes. They're in my style. They're for me to use for my comic, which is like a professional thing. And I don't know, I just feel weird about sharing them, but I'm going to still show you them, and maybe it'll give you an idea of different types of brushes that you could use. So most importantly, this is my rose brush that I always use. Hello. Oh, wrong layer. This is my rose brush that I always use. It's very similar to the one we just made. It's tweaked to have a little bit less variation in size, so I have more control. I really love it. The next brush I love to use is my grass. This grass is so cute because it has little flowers on it, and the flowers can be any color I want. So a lot of times I'll do white or yellow flowers. I just think it's so adorable, and I also use it towards the end of this video. I also use the hydrangea brush, which I'm going to show you now. It's very similar to the rose brush, and I'm very obsessed with it. It's a very simple hydrangea flower. I only drew it once, but I just love the different colors it comes in. I also made my own leaf brush. I'm not a huge fan of it. Something about the shape of the leaves, or I don't know how closely they're clustered, I don't really like, but you can see that it is in my style. And I also used these for the leaves that are in the arch that I'm drawing. I also have this rainbow prism brush that I use all the time, and you can see that it's only one color because it's rainbow. And the way I did that is, remember when I was making the rose brush and I only made it in white and black, and over here I told you very specifically to set it to gray. So for this brush, I keep it to color, and that's how it is only ever the color that I originally drew it in. So that's very helpful. And then I also made this silver star brush, which has a couple different color variations of a silver star. And I use this in the new picnic scene. I also made these really adorable sparkles. I'm going to change the color so they're even cuter. And I haven't used these a ton, but I'm definitely gonna have to use them more because they're really stinking cute. I like that they're pastel. I think that was all the brushes that I have made myself so far, but I'm definitely gonna make more. It's so fun. It makes drawing so much easier, and I hope you found this tip super helpful. Now let's get back to the video. I hope that tutorial was helpful for you. I had a couple of more roses before getting started on the hydrangea bush. I had a couple of cool tone variations of green with my leaf brush, with a focus on darker leaves at the bottom to indicate shadow. I select my favorite hydrangea brush, play with the particle size a little bit, which affects how big the flowers are when you draw them, and then I fill in the bush to my heart's content. I create a hydrangea bush on the other side as well, and I like that it slightly covers the path. I don't know what it is about it, but it just creates a lot more depth for me. It also slightly obscures Giselle, but not too much that you can't see her anymore. Now I go in with my custom grass brush, which I only tend to use on grass that's closest to the camera, where we'll see a lot of detail, because if I was going to use this grass brush for the whole scene, it would just be very overwhelming. You can see I'm being careful to use the brush to cover parts of the stone, which makes the ground look very lush with grass, with the stone being slightly sunken into it. Again, I put all the elements of my foreground in their own folder, which you're going to see why that's important later. I returned to the midground to make a very lazy bush. I just felt like the midground needed some more, so I created a bush that's only slightly different in color from the grass, and then I tossed down some of my grass brush around it to add this sense of lushness and flowers maybe growing out of it. I didn't want to add too many more colors like different flowers back there because I wanted Giselle to stand out from it, and if it was too busy, it would just make it hard to focus on her. Here you're going to see me fidgeting with the tree more, and I end up making a new brush for it because I just was not happy with how the tree was turning out. Here I am with my 1" by 1" canvas. Again, we're hiding the background, selecting a pencil brush, and we're drawing the basic shape of a leafy bush with white. I'm not 100% happy with how this tree brush turned out, so I'm going to keep fidgeting with it, but once I'm happy with it, it'll probably be something that I use all the time for trees. I actually was using the first reference image as a guide for the shape and shading of this tree bush. So I used the black color to create the shadowy parts, and I tried to create a leafy texture with more white highlights on top. Again, the reason I started making all of my own custom brushes is because the Clip Studio asset library is really great for downloading different types of brushes, but they tend to be all different sorts of styles, ranging from realistic to super cartoonish, and it was just really hard to build a collection of brushes that all matched in a style that was suitable for what I needed. Once I learned how to create my own brushes, it was honestly such a game changer for my art. Here I am using my new brush. Again, I'm not super satisfied with it, but it definitely did the job for this piece. Also, I'm sorry if you don't own Clip Studio Paint and none of this is helpful for you. I really recommend it as a drawing program, especially for other comic artists, but it's definitely not a necessity. Also, I'm not sponsored to say this. I just love Clip Studio Paint, and it's pretty much the only thing I draw in now. Add some more of the individual leaf brush on top just to make it look a bit more detailed. At this point of the drawing, I have all the elements I need finished, and it's time for my favorite part of the drawing process, which is rendering the light and shadow. So I create a new layer and set it to multiply, and I clip that layer to the foreground folder. This way, anything I draw will only affect the foreground layer. Like I said, I'm going to make my shadow with a purpley blue color. I want the foreground to be kind of dark to make the rest of the image stand out. So I fill the whole layer with this purple color, and then I delete chunks of the multiply layer using the leaf brush. This creates a sense of dappled light. Moving on to the middle layer, I do the same steps. I create a multiply layer and clip it to the middle folder. I struggled to say that sentence. I repeated it like 11 times. I'm not redoing it even though I'm stammering and stuttering the whole way through. I'm freaking done. Anyway, I go on and add my shadow using the leafy brush because this creates like a dappled effect in the light. I add a lot of shadow on Giselle because she's underneath the tree. I add shadow to the underside of the tree branches, on the tree trunk, and also on a separate layer, I scatter shadow on the ground, and then I use the perspective tool to warp it so that it looks like it's like actually on the ground, not just floating in space. And this creates the shadow of the tree branches on the ground. And then clipping a multiply layer to Celeste, I use the lasso tool to block in shadow on Celeste's dress and body, as well as the swing. I lock the layer and use the airbrush tool to add some variation to the shadow. And I also add some soft shadow to the bushes behind Giselle. Now you're going to find out why it's so important that you keep your entire foreground in one layer. I'm going to duplicate the layer and I'm going to merge. Oh my god, that's so annoying. It doesn't even show that. Oh, I'm freaking out. So the way I set up this recording, unfortunately you can't see what I'm doing, so I'm just gonna have to tell you. I don't know why it does this. It doesn't record the pop-ups that happen in the program. But basically what I do is I merge the entire folder so it's one layer, and then I use Gaussian blur to slightly blur the layer, and this is what's going to create a sense of focal distance. Again, I'm so annoyed that you can't see the pop-up menus in this program. I don't know why my recording program did that, so I'm really sorry. Now it's time for my favorite part of the drawing, which is adding the light. I always draw my light on a layer set to add. Add creates a very strong sense of light. It washes out the color, but it doesn't make it look, I don't know if you've ever used color dodge, but color dodge tends to like, I don't know, it like blows out the color too much. And I find that add is very useful for creating a sense of sunlight, whereas color dodge is slightly better for magical effects, I would say, at least for me. So I'm going to be using a very dark, warm orange color to draw the sunlight in, and I'm using an airbrush tool for the god rays. And then for the tree, I smack down some add leaves using that leaf tool that I keep talking about, and I adjust the color a bit to be more yellow and less orange. I love setting up the light in my pieces to be slightly behind the characters because then I get to do the rim light, and this bright outline just makes my characters pop off the page. Oh, I didn't notice that I was doing it earlier, but you see how the trees in the background are actually blurry? I also used Gaussian blur to blur the trees in the backgrounds a little too. And again, that creates a sense of depth, with the focal point being on the characters in the midground. Going back to the rim light, I use a very light color to outline the characters where I think the sun would be hitting them. Next, on its own add layer, I use a brush to scatter light specks in the air, and this creates the look of like dust mutes or maybe little bugs flying around that are catching the light, and it makes the whole scene look super cute and sparkly. Especially in green scenes like this, I think adding the light mutes make it look like, also I don't know if I'm saying that right, it might be light mites? I don't know, but the light specks just gives this atmosphere of summer to me, and it makes it look so warm. Maybe it's golden hour right now, at least late afternoon. I love how it looks. Similar to the rim light I made on the characters, I also create one for the foreground layer, where I think the sun would be hitting the flower bushes, as well as the wooden arch. Here I am adjusting the darkness of the shadow on the foreground layer, just playing with darkness and intensity to see what I like best. I ended up adjusting the foreground to be darker because I felt like it drew you into the scene where Celeste is swinging up into the sunlight. After adjusting the colors some more, the last step is adding my signature. So you do the same thing. I mean, don't add my signature, add your own to your own image. If you followed this tutorial in any way or were inspired to create your own piece of art from it, please tag me on my Instagram. I would love to see what you made. I hope this was helpful for you. If you want to see another tutorial of a different type of landscape, you can leave a comment about it down below. I know I want to do a tutorial on nighttime scenes and also of lake scenes. So if you're interested in those, drop a comment, let me know. You can follow me on Instagram at Troy's World. You can check out my comic Cinderelle on Webtoons. Also be sure to check out my Patreon, which is called Pixie World. The links to everything will be down below. I'll see you in the next video, and goodbye.